I saw the latest Dungeons and Dragons movie, Honor Among Thieves, a couple of years ago when I was on a plane. My expectations were low, and the movie turned out to be surprisingly entertaining. Still, a few glaring issues have nagged me at the back of my mind ever since. The main problem is that Honor Among Thieves is not good D&D. It's a fantasy adventure set in the Forgotten Realms, but the system in the background doesn't feel like Dungeons and Dragons. It's more like a freeform RPG based on the rule of cool or something. I have played tabletop RPGs for nearly 3 decades, although I've never been the biggest fan of D&D, yet I do like fantasy RPG adventures, so I would presumably fall within the target audience. Let's look at some smaller yet still significant issues first. There's a fair amount of forced diversity and modern messaging. It's not so blatant as to ruin the movie, but it has to be called out nevertheless. I won't go into the details of the story itself though. It's a fairly entertaining fantasy adventure, and there's no need to go into everything that happens, and therefore I can say this critique is spoiler free. The dialogue is at times very Marvel like, which is a minus simply due to its unoriginality.
Why 5 questions?
I don't know, that's just how it works.
Seems arbitrary.
Can we get on with this, please?
Right, yes.
But sometimes the humor lands.
Sounds lovely.
Quite the opposite.
I know I was being ironic.
I find irony is a blade that cuts he who wields it most especially. Yeah?
The protagonist Edgin, or is it Edgin? Anyway, he's a thief, not a rogue, which is old school, and he's played by Chris Pine. I always disliked the guy for playing Kirk in the J.J. Abrams god-awful Star Trek re-rapes. However, I think he seems like a fine actor. The sins of the director and writer are not the actor's fault. His best friend is a warrior woman, Holga. She seems a bit like a barbarian, but her class would be fighter, right? Her appearance is somewhat darker ethnically. The actress is Michelle Rodriguez, which clues us into her background. It's not really woke to have a strong warrior woman like this. It's more like a tired trope, so it makes the concept boring, but not too egregious. The physical appearance of the actress doesn't make the character to feel like a super strong person, however. Just a bit stronger than the thief. There's a bunch of other forced diversity though, usually in the background or as minor characters, which stick out like a sore thumb. Most of the movie happens in Neverwinter. The vast majority of the population are Eluscans, based obviously on Northern Europeans. A significant minority is Chondathan, darker but obviously still white. Then there are some non-humans like half-elves and dwarves in the city. The movie though shows a variety of black people and other plagues of modern ideology here and there. One scene has two city guards, a white woman and a black man, which just feels like a deliberate joke. It would make sense that some ethnic outsiders would have made their way to the city. After all, Forgotten Realms is all about adventure, so some travelers could come from distant lands. Yet Edgin's late wife is a black woman too. The issue is not so much that a man from a city basically lifted from medieval Europe has a black wife, but the fact that nobody bats an eyelid. Certainly, in a world with elves and dragons, this would have been less of an issue than in historical Europe. But still, the movie could have mentioned how she must have come from a distant land or something, as she's clearly not a local. As far as I can say, although I'm not a Faerun geography expert, the closest black people are about 1,000 miles away in lands like somewhere around Chalton here or Turami hereabout. Kalimshan down in the south is a similar distance away and more Arabic in its ethnic makeup. These kinds of racial insertions simply make me feel like I'm watching contemporary California, where the movie was presumably made, rather than an actual fantasy world with a loose basis on history. Now that I think of it, Having a diverse wife does sort of mark Edgin, a straight white male, as one of the good ones, as all white men are racist or something unless proven otherwise. The mulatto daughter is a likable enough kid though. Zenk the paladin, who joins the party briefly, is a well used, diverse character though, and possibly my favorite character in the movie. He's a traveler, an adventurer from distant evil lands, so it's not such a big deal that he's ethnically very different from the majority in Neverwinter. Unlike Edgin's wife, who is just a basic peasant. The biggest problem with Zeng is that he leaves the party too soon. I'm just a sucker for paladins, presented in a proper paladinish way. Doric, the druid, is a tiefling, although she's basically human with elf ears and horns. I guess that's how tieflings look now. I thought they were supposed to be more colorful, inhuman in their appearance. I'm fine with her though, since she's kinda cute. Outside of her, though, the main part is surprisingly human. Only Doric is non human, although Simon the Sorcerer is some kind of mystery meat, and I think he mentions having some inhuman blood in him. The actor himself is probably part goblin, so I guess that's believable in this fantasy movie, though. Forge, one of the original party members, is human too. On a side note, it's nice to see Hugh Grant still alive. He was big in the 90s, but I hadn't heard of him in ages. Glad he survived the blowjob. There are a few dragon dudes in minor roles, and a few other fantasy races, but I noticed a distinct lack of, or rather failed to notice the presence of any dwarves or elves. There's probably a few in the background somewhere, but I'm not going to comb through the whole movie just for them. But are there any with a speaking role? Oh, yeah, there is this guy. At least there isn't a bunch of forced homosexuality in the movie. At some point, we meet Holger's ex boyfriend, who is a small halfling man. She's a big burly warrior, while the man is small and passive. As a joke, this reversal of roles isn't too egregious. Later, we meet his new girlfriend, who is also a big warrior woman. He clearly has a type. My issue here is, however, the way Holga and the ex talk to each other in a very modern and understanding way.
You know, when you left, I lost my family. I've been fortunate enough to find another. And I wish nothing less than that for you.
It feels more like I'm watching TV show from the 90s like Friends or Melrose Place, more than a medieval fantasy. At least Simon talks about courting Doric on a couple of occasions,
I know my last attempt to court you was quite bad.
so some effort was made. What really tickled my pickle the wrong way in Honor Among Thieves is the way combat or action in general is depicted. It's mostly fine for an adventure movie, but it doesn't feel like Dungeons and Dragons. I'll get to that in more detail soon. Another problem with the combat is that the movie makes it obvious Hasbro, that owns D&D, is a toy company and don't want their product associated with excess violence since it's for children. This means that there are hardly any scenes of characters using weapons to attack their enemies in a traditional manner to kill them. Except for this scene. Holga hits guards with her axe and takes down 3 of them, maybe even killing them, but then promptly loses her weapon. I'm not expecting bloodshed and dismembered limbs, simply basic combat, yet it's mostly non existent. Back in the old days, they could make action movies where people got killed without causing absolute anarchy. There's a scene where Holga uses a rock to beat people up when escaping from hostile guards. She could have easily picked up a weapon at some point during the fight. Edkin uses his loot and even a potato as a weapon. Yet the thief never backstabs anyone. Doric tosses someone around as an old bear. At some point, she does cut off the tongue of a mimic with a sword. So they get 1 point, I guess. Later on, Holga beats up more guards without weapons. There's also some magic combat. There's nothing wrong with using improvised weapons, but Honor Among Thieves doesn't seem to allow its characters to use conventional weapons. The one exception is the scene where the paladin cuts down a bunch of baddies with a blade, which is nice. However, they're all undead and get up after the fight. Maybe the movie deserves half a point for that? There is some violence, but my impression is that the safety and sensitivity guardians consider violence with weapons somehow much worse than other kinds of violence, so it has to be very restricted. This reminds me of the Ninja Turtles in the 90s. One of the characters, Michelangelo, is armed with nunchakus. However, to my confusion and consternation as a child, there were some comics where he was armed with a rope. I presume that is because nunchucks were banned in the UK already back then. Also, the Spider-Man cartoon in the 90s didn't allow police to have normal guns because they're too violent, but it was acceptable to turn them into laser guns. Wouldn't have mattered since they never hit anything anyway. Feels like the same level of retardation. Around the mid part of the movie, there's a chase sequence where Doric is spying in the form of a fly. Druids are able to change their form into that of an animal using wild shape. However, there are limits. Not in the movie though. Let's see how many transformations she does within a span of a few minutes. She changes from a fly into a rat, runs into an empty armor and reverts to her humanoid form. Later she becomes rat again, then into a bird. Doric falls and turns into a cat, then becomes humanoid again until she spots the weird turkeys and turns into one, and her last form is a deer. That's 8 transformations within a short time span. Although reverting back into her original form is free, so we scratch those 2. So it leaves us with 6 transformations. According to my understanding, and I might be wrong, in the 5th edition D&D, the latest, to shapeshift that many times within a day, you need to be level 20, max level, especially without short rests. In edition 3.5, I think you can change 6 times at level 18. I don't think Doric is that high level in the movie. Even if I'm wrong about these mechanics, you have to be pretty high level to do what she did. Seeing that scene for the first time simply ruined my suspension of disbelief. On top of being bad D&D, it's also a perfect example of how CGI has made movie making worse. Before CGI, that sort of fast-paced chase scene might have been exciting since it actually required some skill and effort from the movie makers, but now it just feels fake and masturbatory. Perhaps shit like this impresses children, but it does the exact opposite for me. The final complaint about combat is that it does not feel like an RPG. The protagonists don't really fight as a team. Fighting tends to happen one on one or one party member versus multiple enemies. The only time the characters team up to fight an enemy is at the end against the evil, bald female mage, which is better than nothing. But even there, Holga tries to hit her with an axe but loses it and punches her instead. There's very little tactics at that point. They're just mainly beating up the bad guy. You'd think there was at least one scene to show the heroes fight against a squad of enemies, be they orcs, bandits, or soldiers, using tactics resembling an actual RPG. Have the fighter in the front row to draw aggression and protect the physically weak wizard in the back. The thief can backstab, and when one of them gets injured, the healer, something a druid can do, heals them. As Honor Among Thieves is a comedy, they could do a few skits about the occasional clunkiness of role-playing systems, such as having to wait for a turn during combat, or annoyingly miss an attack many turns in a row, or celebrate an absurdly lucky critical hit. There could be a skit of a character carrying an inordinate amount of loot until the dungeon master or another protagonist reminds them of the encumbrance. There was no scene representing the heart of D&D, the combat system. There was combat, but it was movie combat. I get the impression the scriptwriters are familiar with the world of Dungeons and Dragons or Forgotten Realms, yet have never actually played a campaign of the role playing game. At most, they've read some fantasy novels, played a computer RPG, or watched Critical Role, but that's the extent of their interest and knowledge of Dungeons and Dragons. For these reasons, Honor Among Thieves rubs me the wrong way. It's decent entertainment slop that kept me engaged for a couple of hours on the plane. However, my standards are higher than that,
Yes, we were thieves, but I tried to hold us to a certain standard.
and it's not good D&D.